Good morning, afternoon, or whatever time zone it is here. Welcome to Bringing Debian to Mobile Phones One Package at a Time. If you could please, on IRC, precede your questions with question in all caps, and then I can relay them once I've compiled them. Thank you very much. Everybody, welcome Arnaud.
All right. Guess you should hear me now. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're talking about the current efforts into bringing Debian to mobile phones currently. So basically, I'll go through a short introduction with a short history of Linux on mobile next. Then speak about what's going on about packaging mobile-friendly software for Debian and how to use Debian on a few select mobile phones right now. So first, a few words about me. I'm an embedded software engineer specializing in Linux systems, mostly speaking of integration, bootloader, and kernel-related issues. I'm working for Collabora, as you probably have guessed. Been a long time free and open source software enthusiast, actually using Linux for the last 20 years or so. And I've been a Debian user since the Woody release. So recently became a Debian contributor after having a lot of time in the latest year asking myself how I could give back to the community. And you can grab me on IRC. My nickname is Hawaii. So let's get to the point. Currently, the mobile phones OS landscape is not really nice for us open source software users. Basically, it's an Android iOS duopoly. And while technically Android uses Linux, at least for the kernel part, lots of user space software and all the stuff Android builds upon is either closed source or really different from what we use, what we're used to in our standard Linux distributions. And of course, aside from a few projects such as Lineage OS based on Android, we lack a fully open source options. So how did Linux came to mobile devices first? Well, to my knowledge, it all started with a sharp Zorus, and then you can see a few devices over time, but almost always, within using some proprietary software stack or UI or stuff like that. And it was really difficult until a few years back to get some mobile phone or mobile device in general running standard Linux and things you could tinker with and hack the system to your likes. Hopefully, now there are a few open source software Linux-based mobile projects. The main ones are UBports, which is taking over Ubuntu Touch after Canonical stopped supporting it. There is Postmarket OS, which is gaining some traction right now. Maemo Lest, which is building upon when Nokia stopped, basically, when they dropped Maemo. Nemo Mobile, it's rather the open source foundation to Sailfish OS. It's based on Migo. And finally, Loon OS is the community maintained port of WebOS, which used to be Palm OS and evolved into WebOS when LG bought the system. One interesting note here is that Postmarket OS is the only one which is really close to a standard Linux distribution and doesn't add a whole lot of custom UI or custom libraries or custom services. But yeah, apart from that, basically you just have a whole ecosystem Even though MaiMoLess can be related to Debian as it's based on Dev1, it's still far from being a standard Linux stack and just things you could port to other distributions. When it comes to hardware support, so far it's mostly used on Android phones using the Halium project, which means most of the time you have no mainline support and often have to use outdated vendor kernels. But fortunately, there's been a new players in the last couple of years, which are Purism with the Librem 5 smartphone and the Pine64 with the PinePhone and soon the PineTab. Interesting points with this is that they use or try to use at least a mainline Linux kernel. Every development is done in the open. You have a GitLab group on gitlab.com for Pine64 where you'll find the kernel, bootloader, and ARM-trusted firmware for these devices. And Purism runs a GitLab instance, which is publicly available, and you can even register and submit issues or merge requests. And indeed, these two companies are really accepting and encouraging contributions. And upstreaming is a goal for both of them. So now that we have some companies, I say, supporting officially a standard Linux distributions, or at least a standard way of dealing with Linux systems, what can we do to improve that from a Debian perspective? First, we can package mobile-friendly software for Debian. And you have to understand the whole mobile software stack. Basically, it's kind of a standard Linux stack. You have the kernel and bootloader first, which are really obviously hardware specific. And then you have the base system, which is the base user space libraries and utilities, things like systemd, network manager, and the shell and everything. Fortunately for Debian, we have already that, which is available. For ARMv7, you have the ARMHF Debian architecture, and for 64-bit ARMv8, you have ARM64. And really, all the base software needed is already in the Debian archive. So that's really a good point to start with. And on top of that, you have to have a graphical environment, of course. And there are two currently which are the most advanced, I think, and the most appealing to existing mobile phone users. These are Foch, which is driven by Purism, and basically it's GNOME-based. You have a specific compositor and a graphical shell. But on top of that, everything is really GNOME-based and using the same daemons and software. Then you have Plasma Mobile, which is basically the KDE counterpart to Foch. They didn't make any official release yet, but it's still work in progress, and I believe it's making good progress currently. And of course, you have to have mobile-friendly, user-facing applications. So with this in mind, there's a Debian team called Debian on Mobile. It's a team dedicated to packaging software which might be useful for owners of mobile devices. We're currently focusing on getting the Foch graphical environment and GNOME mobile-friendly apps into the Debian archive. We have already uploaded a couple base packages, such as libhandy or feedbackd. Libhandy being some library for making GTK applications usable on a mobile phone. The graphical environment, also the base packages are here, which are Foch, the Wayland compositor, and Foch, the graphical shell itself. And we're still working on many more packages, such as libpurple plugins, because as a mobile users, instant messaging is a big deal and really important. So libpurple plugins are important to be able to communicate with various IM networks, I'd say, such as Matrix, XMPP, and so on. And also an on-screen keyboard, which is QuickBoard, developed by Purism also. Regarding other apps, some of the GNOME apps already have an adaptive UI, which means they can scale from a desktop app to a mobile app depending on the screen size. GNOME Contacts, GNOME Clocks, and the Sound Recorder are just a few examples, but you have really quite a bit of them. Unfortunately, lots of applications are really not designed for use on small screens, so we need to work with upstream developers to improve that. And afterwards, when we have our changes are merged, we can finally package these applications or improve the current packaging of said applications to have them available for mobile users. We're doing this through a Salsa group, and we also have a Matrix channel to discuss all of that. But I'll put you the links at the end of the presentation too. So what if we want to use Debian on a mobile phone right now? Well, this is a project I started a few weeks ago, Mobian Projector. It's an independent project from Debian. It was started initially basically because I wanted to create a Debian image for the PyPhone I just received. So it was all hacks and stuff at the beginning, but all in all, it evolved into something cleaner and more generic. But the base reasoning behind that is that not all packages we need for one specific device can go into Debian. For the PyPhone, for example, the kernel is a downstream kernel maintained by Pine64 at the moment, because there are still lots of bits that needs to be merged upstream. So we can't really just port the patches to Debian, and we rather have to wait until they go upstream before we can benefit from this into the Debian archive. And there are also some packages that we worked on as part of the Debian on mobile team that are uploaded to Debian, but still waiting in the new queue. And we need them right now to work on the PinePhone. So basically, the whole idea was to set up a separate repo to hold these packages while we wait for them to reach the main Debian archive. It's growing into a more generic project than just simply an image for PyPhone. She's providing a basic infrastructure to target various mobile devices and provide immediately every package needed to run Debian on supported devices. The goals of the project are to minimize changes and contribute back to Debian as much as possible, collaborate with both Debian and upstream authors to improve software and packaging, and in the end, we just want to make Debian a popular platform for mobile devices and gain some traction in this field. So Mobian is based on Bullseye because quite a few software in stable is a bit outdated for our use case. We use the main Debian archive as the primary package source, and we provide a minimal overlay package archive, which is targeting currently the AMD 64, ARM HF, and ARM64 architectures. And we don't hold much packages in this archive. We have around 20 packages we imported from Debian and and have to patch for them to work better on the small display. These are mostly GNOME apps with some UI patches, generally taken from the Purism work. Also a couple ones such as Modem Manager with a few different compile options. We also have some packages which are uploaded in Debian as we want them, but waiting in a new queue, as I mentioned before, so we simply make them available through our own repo, and a few custom packages, which are mostly meta packages and some tweaks to the Polkit policies and default config. The images themselves are generated using DebOS on a daily basis, And we currently only have one package feed, but we plan to add another one so that we have a staging repo and the main stable, sort of stable repo. So what's next? We plan to target a bit more devices. We plan to support the Librem 5 and the PineTab by the end of the year, depending on when we get our hands on them, and more devices may be added in the future, depending on how they're available to different developers of the project. We might provide more UI options. Personally, I prefer working on Forge, but if somebody is interested into packaging and helping porting Plasma Mobile, that could be an option. Maybe a full-featured GNOME desktop, mostly for the PineTab. We'd like to integrate more closely into Debian. The project is still young, only a couple of weeks old, but why not integrate some bits into Debian, become part of the Debian project somehow, or even use Xrepo, as I just learned about it this morning, for the Mobian repository. And of course, keep working on new packages and improve the infrastructure. So basically, to wrap it up, Debian on mobile is a long-term effort to bring every needed package into Debian. Mobian allows quick testing and building image for the PinePhone and hopefully more devices soon. And well, the basic problem here is that more mobile-friendly apps are needed, such as the calendar, IM clients, and name whatever you'd like. And of course, we're open to contribution and welcome everyone wanted to work on this area. So here are some links about the two projects. Feel free to reach out to us, and I'm afraid we won't have many time for questions, but you can ask one or two, I guess. That's it for me. Thanks everyone for watching.